Welcome to the Inside Scoop, your one-stop shop for cracking the leadership code. Have you ever wondered what those conversations are like in the boardroom? Curious about the secret sauce successful executives possess? On the Inside Scoop podcast, we sit down with successful executives, getting their unique perspective on what it takes to be a good leader. They'll share their hard-won wisdom, the crucial competencies needed to thrive as a leader, and the unexpected lessons learned along the way. Here, we unlock the secrets of the executive suite. We get the inside track directly from the leaders themselves. In each episode, we'll dissect the essential skills needed to go from manager to leader, offering a leader's perspective on the challenges, triumphs, and unexpected wisdom they've acquired. The Inside Scoop, leadership lessons, served fresh.
Glad you joined us for this episode of the Inside Scoop. My name is Eduardo Bryant, and I'm your host. Well, today we have put together an outstanding show. We're sure you are going to love it. We're going to be talking about calling it straight. Even the title can grip you. If you find something that you enjoy that's connecting with you, we encourage you to subscribe and become part of our viewing audience. This podcast, it's available wherever you get your podcast. So now, without further ado, our guest is Tina Nguyen. She is the VP of Employee Engagement for the San Diego Humane Society, and her story is nothing short of amazing. Let's welcome her in right now. Tina, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Eduardo. Very nice to be here.
You know, the pleasure is all mine. I love it. I am so glad to have you. In fact, I've been looking forward to this podcast now for several weeks. So I'm glad we were able to find time to make it happen.
Yes.
So before I begin, there's a little thing I always like to ask all of our guests, because obviously in your world, at that VP level, which is not easy to get to, by the way, and I tell my audience all the time, it's not easy to get an access to people like you because of how busy you are, and certainly you're in that role. Sometimes maybe at a dinner party for the company, maybe standing around at the cocktail hour, some of the employees get a chance to rub elbows with you. And then, of course, they tell you all about their story. So it's not easy to get you guys' attention. So that's one of the reasons why I'm so excited to have you here. But one of the things I like to ask is, as you are staying on top of your game and certainly keeping your mind free from a lot of clutter, because obviously there's a lot of stuff going on, we call it noise. Share with the audience, what are you reading right now?
Well, there's a lot of things that I'm reading, whether it be through podcasts, books, but really I'm just reading you. I'm reading people. I'm reading how people are just connecting with each other and really responding to each other, whether it be through social media, TikTok, Facebook, if you still are on that, just kind of reading people in general and seeing how people are responding to life in general.
Now, doesn't that fit perfectly with what your title is? Employee engagement. And I can tell you, Tina, companies are constantly trying to find ways to have employee engagement. I mean, they're constantly doing things like team building activities. I'm sure you've done many of those. I've done a lot of those, trying to find ways that employees can interact with each other, and also cross departments. A lot of companies work in silos, and they're trying to figure out ways to have that employee engagement so that it's not, this is our silo and then there's your silo, but to have more of a team function. So I like that answer. I think that fits in perfect with what you're doing.
Yes.
So, now, let's see. Here you are. You sit on a perch that's way up there, vice president. It is something that many people aspire to and never reach. I'm sure the audience, I know I would like to hear how you got there. I'm sure that it was not a linear path. There probably was a few bends and curves and twists and turns. You might have even had a cliff or two that you fell off. Take a moment, share with the audience how Tina got to where she is.
All right. Well, first of all, I feel like you're saying that I'm on this pedestal, but I'm more of that low-hanging fruit where that branch is all the way down the bottom. But sometimes you, in a tree, you're on the top, and then after a while, it kind of spreads its wings to the bottom, and then sometimes you get trimmed, you kind of bounce back up. I think that's what you were describing in the journey of, HR and my journey. So it's not that exciting, but I'll share with you that how did I get here? Boy, it goes way back. There's to your family, how you grew up, and I think I came from a very humble beginnings where coming to America as an immigrant, as a refugee specifically to the United States was a very unique journey for me and my family. And we really didn't have anything other than the clothes on our backs, literally, and really had to start off fresh. And so, um, being refugees and really coming from hardworking parents, I think that was the beginning of my journey in life, is that we learned to work really hard. We valued education and continue to learn and grow and work very hard. So I think that really transpired to who I am today. How I got to where I'm at is through those life lessons, coming to America and really valuing, very specific things, educating myself, learning, growing connections, um, and leveraging all those things, including family and friends, to build the future where we're at, and where I'm at as well. So all those components together got me to where I am today. And that's in a nutshell. There's a lot of things in between.
Oh, I'm sure that there are. And I love the fact that you are so humble, saying that you're not up there. I don't know. VP title is pretty nice. So good for you though. And you talked about the hard work. That's one of
Mhm.
those areas that I think we throw out all the time. I mean, everybody says they're hardworking, right? We kind
Mhm.
of use that almost as a regular model to say that we're hardworking. I'd love for you to expound on that just a little bit, because hard work could mean one thing to one person and totally something different to somebody else. Give us a glimpse into your hard work.
Yeah. Well, hard work is really doing your job, learning your job, taking the initiative to educate yourself, be a better person, whether that be within your job, to be a better leader. It's working hard to build your expertise. So some people aren't natural leaders. And so working hard means that to be able to propel yourself, you're going to have to take the learning development classes. You're going to have to read books to be better managers, leaders, developers of your employees. And so to me, working hard is not only putting in the time and effort into what you're doing to bring you to where you're at, but really applying it. I mean, you can learn, right? We can talk, we can go to seminars, we can do everything, but taking that and applying it and then sharing the knowledge to employees so that they can develop themselves. That's the hard work. It doesn't come easy.
I'd love to hear you say that because it doesn't come easy. And I was wondering as you were talking, I was thinking how much, from a management standpoint, would you say should be self-initiated versus maybe management initiated? And before you answer that, let me put some parameters around that. For example, we often think that it's a wonderful thing for us to kind of develop and go to seminars like you talked about and read books and do those kinds of things. But from a management standpoint, how would you kind of view that if a person says, yeah, I want to go do this and take the initiative, versus when you say, you know what, my job as a manager is to develop my people. I mean, that's the primary job of a people manager, is to develop their people. Certainly they hire, bring new blood into the organization, but bar none, their job is to develop them. Where would you say that kind of falls in there? Should it be self-initiated or should it be manager initiated?
Hmm. I think the HR answer is it depends. It depends on the time and the place. I think if you ask, Tina 20 years ago, it would be the management's responsibility, or actually, let me take that back. It's actually the employee's responsibility. You're self-directed. If you want to move up, you have to put in the work. You have to do the work. You have to put the time in. Now, our world has changed, and I feel like it is more of the organization, the leadership's responsibility to help develop the employees, because that's what the employees are expecting, asking for, demanding, if you will. And so I think that shift has gone from employee to now the organization. But I also believe that it's a combination of both, right? You can only work so hard, but if the employee is not working as hard as you are to develop them, then you're doing too much. That's my perspective, but both.
No, that is good. I wonder if you see that. I mean, in your role, I wonder if you see or even have an audience to those conversations where managers are actually suggesting, recommending programs and different things, because a lot of that stuff has got to go through your department to get approved, because obviously employees are going to say, hey, who's going to pay for that workshop or seminar, right? So I'm sure you guys do a lot of approving on that. How much of that are you actually seeing coming out of managers, or what are your thoughts around that? Do you think managers actually are doing a lot of that, or are managers just so busy trying to keep up with the mounds of paperwork, emails, voicemails that they're constantly going through, meetings that they have? Are you seeing a lot of that?
I can only speak from my experience. And I think with effective organizations and effective leaders, we have to drive that. And so, from an HR perspective, we drive employee development, and share that with leaders as far as their expectations or our expectations of leaders to drive that to their employees. So, for example, in our budgeting process, employee development is one of those things that we include for leaders to include in their budget. And with our performance management feedback sessions, our touch base throughout the year, questions about employee development is critical that we add on for leaders to have those conversations with employees as to how employees want to be developed. What is it that they need to get to their next destination, whether it be just developing themselves within their own job, developing them to their next position. We can create those type of structures to make it easy for leaders, because they are very inundated with their day-to-day. And so they need HR's help, they need the organization's help to help create those structures to make employee development critical. And it is, right?
It's very critical. It's really, I mean, the lifeblood of any company are its employees. I mean, it's in the mission statement of virtually every company. And so it speaks to exactly what you just said, the ability to help train and develop those people. The title of this podcast, I think, fits in right here, calling it straight. So as a manager, you got to call it straight. So here's one of those things. It's an area that I'm sure managers don't like, but from time to time, it certainly comes up. If you're calling it straight, you're going to have some employees that perhaps simply can't do it. There's that old thing. There's a can do and there's a will do. And there are simply some people who can't do it. They just cannot. They may have a desire, they may want to do it, but it's just not in the cards for them. So now, across the spectrum, in general, what are some thoughts you have around how managers really approach a person that just can't do it? I know we have a title for some of those things, but we call it performance management. You understand all of that because that's kind of the world in which you live. But that's an area there that managers are either good at or not very good at.
Yeah. And I would say that many are not good at, because it's really difficult to provide that critical feedback. when somebody's doing a great job, it's easy to say, good job, Eduardo. You did a rocking job on that presentation. But when somebody doesn't do so good, or you want to give them some feedback, you don't want to hurt their feelings and you don't want to say something that may demotivate them. And that's why, calling it straight really is important, because if they don't hear it, they don't know it. And if they don't know it, they're not going to change, right? And so calling it straight as a leader, it's a skill that we really haven't taught people. And that is a developmental component where we really need to be transparent in our communication, saying it in the best way, but calling it straight and setting those expectations so that the employee can really get the feedback, be able to learn from it, and do better the next time.
Let's get in the weeds on that just a little bit. So for all the managers out there that are listening to this podcast or watching it, and they're thinking to themselves, you know what? I've got to do that from time to time, and I'm not really great at it. What kind of development, training, what would you say are some of the skills, even competencies that are needed for a manager to have that skill developed in them so that they can provide the type of feedback that you were just talking about? My guess is it circles around communication, but I'd love to get your thought. I'm not the expert there, you are.
Oh boy, it so many things. Communication is fundamental to almost everything, right? Everything we do, effective communication is fundamental. I would say some of the skills is to recognize what are the expectations that we're having of employees, to be able to know, are they meeting the mark? Are they not meeting the mark? And really identifying, where we are on that spectrum as far as performance. Can we describe what the performance expectation is? And if we are able to do that, then we're able to articulate where there's a gap in between that performance to the employees. Some leaders don't see those gaps, and so they can't address it. So I think understanding what the overall expectations of team members is critical, and being able to call it out and calling it out timely. Some addressing things right away versus procrastinating or just hoping that that behavior or that deficit gets improved in time. That doesn't always work. And many times people like to not address things head on. And when we say calling it straight, it's really just addressing things in the moment, in the time, right away. And so it's a learning, teachable moment, and then you move on, rather than letting things build up and then finally at some point saying, oh, this isn't working, because that's not fair. And, from an HR perspective is that we want to be fair, we want to be consistent, and we want to make sure that we provide the tools to help people succeed. And communicating, the performance, communicating whatever it is that we want to help the person improve on immediately is really the best way to help them succeed.
You said something in there that made my ears perk up. And what you said was some managers, they don't want to hurt the employees' feelings.
Mm-hmm.
So now I'm thinking, how many times have I had a hard conversation with my manager over the years? How many times have I had a manager that just knew how to, smooth the situation over to say, here's an area of development for you, versus the one that just comes in and, quite frankly, they didn't care if they hurt your feelings or not. They just told it to you straight. And oh my. And then, of course, you're dejected. You're demoralized. You go home that evening and you don't have a good day. Those kind of things can affect employees across the board. Because you know as well as I do, especially in your role, that the number one reason a person leaves a job is their manager.
Yep.
People leave good jobs because of their manager. And
Yep.
people struggle. Yeah, exactly. I mean, you can confirm that. That's the reason. So there comes into play that I don't want to hurt your feelings, yet I need to call it like it is.
Mm-hmm.
Tell it to you straight. I can only imagine that's got to be an area of real challenge for your department and for managers just across the board in general.
Yeah. And it's a skill set that we have to improve on, right? Calling it straight, being consistent. There's definitely calling it straight doesn't mean saying what comes in your mind all the time. You have to kind of filter it and process it, calling it as it is in the most respectful, compassionate way. You can still send a hard message and say it in the best way, and that's really a skill set that you have to hone in on, so that they hear the message and are able to take the information and be able to improve, not to hear the message and then be demoralized and then be defensive and work against why you're actually sharing the feedback in the first place. So that's another component of the leadership development tactics, skills, abilities that a leader has to have is saying it straight, but saying it with compassion and sharing the message, asking more questions than maybe you're telling, so that the person actually is receptive of whatever the feedback is.
In the opening, you talked about reading people. What a
Mhm.
valuable skill that has got to be. The ability to read people. Have you, over the years, been able to kind of quantify, just from reading people, since that's one of the things that you do, and I'm sure you didn't just start it yesterday, probably been doing it for a long time, and are probably quite good at it. It's kind of like, if I can make and give an example, it's kind of like interviewing. When
Yeah.
managers have to interview people, sometimes we get lost in the process because we got a list of questions that we want to ask. And if it's a panel interview, everyone's got their favorite question picked out, that they want to make sure that they get out there on the table. And even if it's just a one-on-one, you are asking all of these questions. But in true interviewing, being able to really pick people, it's not so much just asking these questions and trying to find out what experience they have that's in the same space, but really understanding human behavior, human nature, being able to read the person, because that's where you can learn about them. Whatever the product or the widget, we call it, is, you can teach that in a very short period of time, typically under 30 days, 60 days, if it's not too, technical. You can teach that and they'll be just as good as almost anyone that's been there 3 years. But the other stuff in reading people, that's a lot harder to do. So to your point, in reading people and having people have certain skills to be able to offer, we sometimes call it difficult conversations. Have you been able to kind of compartmentalize, this type of person typically does a little bit better when it comes to that versus this type? Just curious.
Gosh, I think, you're describing, emotional intelligence, right? That's another skill that leaders need to learn. And can I quantify it? Um, I know that there's data out there that can say emotional intelligent leaders are going to be more effective because you're really working on honing in your communication style. You're talking to somebody, you're seeing their body language, you're seeing how they respond to you, you're seeing they're smiling, looking away, or just, disengaging. All those things are communication and reading the room, reading the person that you're talking with to really understand, are they interested in this conversation? Are the listeners right now interested in this conversation? And why are they interested in the conversation? And so I think that is yet another skill that leaders need to learn. And it is an extremely important, aspect of a leader in this day and age, because we're lost on a lot of connections that we used to have before. We're doing Zoom is probably taking over our lives, whether it be a virtual platform like Zoom or others, is that we don't get to connect, we don't get to touch somebody's arm, or we don't get to just have that proximity that we did before. So it's even more important to be able to connect with people from that perspective and level. And then I got lost to what you were asking, but yeah, that's critical. It's important.
No, I think you hit the nail on the head, because when we talk about emotional intelligence, and thanks for bringing it up, is it not one of the most critical aspects of being in management. Because when you're in management, you are the leader, right? You're in charge of. And when you're in charge of, everybody looks up to you and they expect certain things from you. And so having high emotional intelligence, in fact, there are studies out there, and you asked about that. There are many studies out there that point to a person's EQ, the higher it is a greater predictor of success. So it's not how smart you are, because there are a lot of really, really, really smart people, but they're really low in emotional intelligence. And we all understand what emotional intelligence is. It's the ability to connect and to relate to others. I mean, self-actualization and all those big words that come into play when you talk about it. That's what it's really about, is your ability to connect. And when people can do that, I'm quite sure that that's when they can make a greater impact. Because after all, you're here to make people better, not to chase them away. So when you talk about emotional intelligence, I think just about everybody would raise their hand and say, I agree, Tina. This is one of the greatest aspects that is needed in order to relate to people, especially when you have to deliver some bad news. But that's bad news. Let's talk a little bit about some good news here. All right, you're a manager. You want to be a manager. You want to lead people. This is what you want to do. We talked about emotional intelligence. Let's talk about what are some of those characteristics and traits. Now, we've read a lot of them in books, but I want to go a little deeper. I don't want to talk about having this competency or that competency. I'm really interested in some of the non-traditional type things. I call it an aura, and some people have it. And that aura, I think, is what kind of exudes. Sometimes it's just good eye contact. Sometimes it's the ability to not talk about your situation, but to really actively listen and care when somebody's sharing a story about themselves, and then show that level of empathy. Have you seen some of that? What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, you used the word care, and I think that um, way back when, it's business. It's only business. You separate your work from your life, and we have transitioned to work and life are really one and the same. And so it's really important to connect with employees on an individual basis. And I've seen that transition in the workplace where if you don't care about a person and you don't care about what their lives are, what's going on with their lives, you lose that connection with the employee, and that is really that what they need and thrive for. So that's a motivator, if you will. That's the aura. That's the you, Eduardo, care about me, employee, as a person. I'm not your employee. I am a person. And so I think that is a profound change in the workplace that we've experienced these days, is the expectation that we really do need to care about people as individuals.
What does that old saying, how does that old saying go? People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So I think that that says it right there, because that's exactly what it is. And so some of those intrinsic, intangible types of things. So we want to make better leaders. So that's the goal, right? Is once you get into management, you don't want to be learning on the job. It's not like this is a training ground for you, because unfortunately, if it is a training ground, it's at the expense of someone else, or lots of people, perhaps, if you are over a department. So that learning on the job can be quite devastating, because as you make mistakes, then it adversely affects your employees. So now, from a management standpoint, you got to deal with calling it straight, but at the same time, showing a level of emotional intelligence. That's got to be a hard balance, because some people are pushed in different ways. Some people come from certain industries where it's pound your fist on the table, it's hard stomping. Some industries, they teach manage by fear. You don't want to be friends with your employees. I can remember early on in my career, they would tell the managers, look, at the big national meetings, you stay with just the managers. You don't mingle over with the reps. You let the reps do their thing, and the managers have a management table. The managers hang out on this part of whatever, the managers do this. They wanted them to really keep that from being commingled. They wanted them to be separate. Have you seen that, or would you say that that's changing?
Oh boy. I haven't seen it in my world, and I don't think it's very effective in today's world at all. There's a lot of again, we are driven by a lot of social um, components in our workplace today. And so equality, diversity, inclusion, all of those are very important components in the workplace today. It's important to employees and it's important to us. And having that delineation between, upper management or staff doesn't exist. And if it does, it's not effective because whether it be fear or that delineation between the classes will only support so much. But when there's a next opportunity that comes along, people are going to turn over. They're not going to stay with an organization because of those types of policies or practices. They're going to want to go to an organization that has the diversity, the equity, the inclusion, the ability to connect with leaders as people, and vice versa. And so I think that is not exactly the best motivator to employees these days. And I see that with the new workforce. And so we have a brand new workforce taking over the organizations, and they have a more equal plane expectation that we really need to listen to these days. It's not about that type of class and levels anymore. It's about what can I contribute to the organization, irregardless of my title, irregardless of me being staff and you being management. There's a lot of different expectations these days, and we have to adapt to those things because it is changing. Whether or not we are resistant, and hopefully we're not, but this is why we're having this talk, is about leadership and how do we change ourselves to really understand our new population so that we can adjust and provide them the the tools and the resources to be the next leaders.
If I hear you clearly, what you're talking about are approachable managers. The ability to not be so far removed from the people you manage that they can't reach you and can't touch you. And you mentioned something about employees will leave. Years ago, maybe 20 years ago, it was considered really negative to have multiple jobs. I mean, they really wanted you to be somewhere for 12 years. And even in interviews, they would ask questions. Why can't you stay with a job? You've had 5 jobs in the last 12 years. And they're asking those types of questions in the interview. Why don't you stay? Do you get bored easily? What's the problem? Why are you leaving? Today, if you're at one company for many years, the questions change. How come you haven't been promoted? Why aren't you the CEO of the company by now? Why are you still there? Those types of things come up. So now we see people hopping all the time. People stay on a job 2 to 3 years. I mean, I don't know how many resumes you look at, but I've looked at thousands. And you look at resumes and you really see, year and a half, 7 months, 8 months, 2 years, and people just all over the place. In fact, you can even go on LinkedIn and just look at people's jobs. And then you'll see that it's just job after job after job after job after job after job. That's the norm now. It's not 2 jobs and this one's there 18 years and this guy was there 22 years. It just doesn't work that way anymore. So to your point, people will leave and they will go unless you can hold them. So how do you keep them then with people jumping ship so much? In your role, I mean, you probably do exit interviews all the time for people. How are managers supposed to keep employees?
Well, I think it is asking them what they want. And whether it be through pulse surveys, engagement surveys, through their weekly, monthly check-ins, is really asking the question. And when you ask people questions, you're going to get different answers. And so it's really providing all the tools for your workforce so that you can keep them. Exit interviews are great. but you don't want to ask these questions when they're leaving out the door. You know, you want to keep them before they walk out the door. So, you know, those type of tactics is having the communication, the ongoing conversations, asking it straight, like, what's going to keep you here, Eduardo? And really, you know, having the, I guess, the courage to be able to ask those hard questions and getting those answers so that you can respond to their needs. I can tell you from the exit interviews and from our surveys that we've provided for our organization, you know what employees want?
What?
They want development. They want to grow. They want to learn, and they want to be able to expand their horizons. And by developing them, and as we talked about earlier in the segment, is that whose responsibility is it? Is it their responsibility to grow themselves? Is it the leadership's responsibilities? We know it's both. It takes both. We have to ask the question and we also have to respond.
You know, on surveys, that's a topic that comes up a lot, not just for employees, but for managers as well. Lots of companies, and I mean lots and lots of companies, they really don't invest in their employees on development. What they invest in is product training service. They will give you all the tools you need on how to sell the product and to be familiar with the product and to know just about everything about your service that you offer. But when it comes down to that actual development, we're talking skill development. We're talking things like what type of questions to ask. Do you know how to lead without authority? Even, we talked about it a little bit earlier, even interviewing. How many managers actually get professional interviewing training? Virtually none. They just are expected to bring in the company's most valuable resource with zero training whatsoever. They just do what they've always done, or maybe the interviews that they've had in the past. And not everybody is a great interviewer or interviewee. So I think, much to your point, that development piece is a critical piece that companies, they just don't invest in that to the point that they should, I don't think, and clearly not to the point where their employees want it on both sides, employee as well as management.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Eduardo. And it's not just one-time training, it is ongoing training. You know, just when you try to throw a basketball, right? You have to practice not once, not twice, 100 times before you get it in. And once you get it in once, that doesn't mean you stop there to say, hey, I got the basketball in, right? Basketball players then continue to do it and do it and do it. And so therefore that skill set is then built and then they're able to do it and do it consistently. And just like leadership development and management development, it's not just training once that you gave to an employee or a manager, you know, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago. It's ongoing. And so I think that's the other message is that it needs to happen and needs to happen consistently so that that muscle memory is built and then becomes their nature. You got to fake it till you make it, and you got to practice until it becomes perfection. And nothing is perfect. So you have to continue to do it and do it and do it and do it, right?
Well said. And I think that companies could really benefit from understanding that part and realize that let's not just go off and have a big meeting for 4 or 5 days and then we do all that other stuff, you know, the compliance training and bring in HR to talk about some type of regulatory stuff. And I think that's important. Obviously, you have to have that, but you want to set aside, I think, equal amount of time to really develop your people. And that's what they appreciate and they stay because now their skills are getting better. You know, there's a saying out there, you can either train your people and worry that they will leave the company, or you can not train them and have them stay. So you can see how that would turn out, right? So,
Right.
yeah, good. You know what, Tina, I think this has been some good stuff. I have appreciated hearing your thoughts and your ideas and things that are around, you know, employee engagement, because that's really what it's about. Is making sure that people are together. I mean, you talked about the whole DE&I. That's employee engagement and being approachable from a management standpoint. That's employee engagement. and understanding that, we all work together to collectively come out with a win to make the organization grow. And I really enjoyed this. I'd like to give you a moment in case there were some things that you wanted to say that you didn't say, but thought, here's a good point, and you want to make that point. I will give you an opportunity now to just have the floor and say whatever it is that perhaps you meant to say, thought about, but didn't get a chance. The floor is yours.
All right. Well, thanks, Eduardo. Boy, so many things. Hard to really pinpoint a few, but as we talked about, whose responsibility is it to develop themselves? Although we recognize that it does go both ways. I think that with the way organizations and the world is moving today, and what the expectations are for our employees, it really is incumbent upon us as leaders to develop our workforce. And your quote about whether you develop your employees and be afraid that they will leave or not develop them and have them stay, that's really not the objective. Your objective is to develop them so that they will be the best leader out there, whether it be for your organization or other organizations, because you had put a part of their success with developing them. And really, it's making the world a better place by developing people. And I think for me, it's whether they stay at the organization, which they will stay if they know that you're investing in them. But if for whatever reason they don't, you made them better for the next person. And I think that's a win-win.
Well, thank you so much. Great time. So glad we had this time to spend with you. We look forward to chatting with you again at another time, but this has been awesome. Good stuff. And I want to thank everybody that's been listening to the podcast. Certainly appreciate your listening ear on this episode of The Inside Scoop, Calling It Straight. Once again, if you heard some things that you thought, yeah, that was good, we invite you to subscribe and become part of our viewership. Until we can come together again and have another episode, we want to thank you very much for listening and or watching. Bye for now.
For more exclusive leadership insights, be sure to subscribe to The Inside Scoop on YouTube and Spotify. And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to hit that share button and spread the word. See you next time on The Inside Scoop.